Hello and welcome back to the Coming of Cage podcast, your Nicolas Cage movie review podcast. I'm Derek. That is Ryan.
Some days it's Ryan, yeah. What's
What are
up?
you other days?
I don't really know. I didn't think that one through.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's fine. You figure that out and you
We'll
let me
go
know.
He Who Shall Not Be Named. Not Voldemort, just that.
Just that.
Yeah,
Literally. Okay.
exactly.
Cool. Well, I'm Derek always, so that nice and simple.
Sure.
But this is episode 59 of the show. We are reviewing 2019's crime mystery thriller, Grand Isle, which
Yes.
co-stars KaDee Strickland, Luke Benward, and Kelsey Grammer, primarily.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is about, quote, a young father is charged with murder and must prove his innocence by recalling a very twisted and dark night of events.
Which is a description of this movie, although not really giving away anything.
Yeah, it's at least accurate.
Yeah.
You
In the
know,
in the loosest possible way.
well, no spoilers in the
The
synopsis.
only way it could have gotten more loose is if they were like, this is a movie where things happen. And then some other stuff happens. And that's the
That's
whole movie.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I will say, just out of the gate, this movie's rated very poorly. It's got a 4.7 on IMDb. I actually didn't think it was horrible. I don't think it's great. I don't want to say that this is a good movie necessarily, but I think a 4.7 might be a little unfair.
I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, this is right in the middle in terms of quality. I'd put it there with some of the early movies we reviewed, Inconceivable, and some of those.
Inconceivable. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Well, what are we doing here, Ryan? How do we do this?
Well, mostly we start recording and then we talk at each other for about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes.
Good. We're off to a good start then.
Yeah, we've really started on a strong note. But no, I take notes from the movie while we're watching in some sort of either chronological order as they happen in the movie, not
Yes.
necessarily as they happen in the events of the movie.
Right.
And we just kind of go through it step by step.
Day by day.
That's right.
So what do you got first? What's your first note out of the gate?
That's what I'm pulling up right now. I'm sorry, I had to open my book.
Oh, okay.
Trees and fog is my first note.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, after we get our 6 production companies twice,
Right, right.
we
Well,
get
we can't
some
have a movie without that.
we get some nice fog. Um and that's really
And trees,
meaningless,
like
I
a bunch of
guess.
close-ups of trees and fog.
Yeah,
We
it's
get a lot of the
because
helicopter shots in movies. This is the first time it's just been trees and fog, I think.
and I think it's because they know that we put the helicopter shot on our KJO bingo, and they're like, we're not going to give you that
That's
this
right. You
week.
don't get that.
Yeah, no square
Um,
for you.
my second note is Southern Belle because we meet one of the first people of the movie, the first like characters in the movie, and it is what's her name? Beauty or
Fancy,
something like that.
fancy.
Fancy, that's what it is. Yeah.
KaDee Strickland's
It's
character.
not her real name. That is a nickname based on some other names she has.
Yes.
Um, we get two girls delivering Girl Scout cookies or like trying to sell Girl Scout cookies coming to the door.
Hmm.
And she says, "Great, I'll take 2 boxes," and doesn't say what kind she wants at all at any point, and that really bothered me.
Yeah, she
Because
just says any 2 boxes.
if you ever have ordered Girl Scout cookies, they have like 8 different types or something, and Thin Mints.
I mean, maybe that's what she meant. She's like, it's implied that it's the Thin Mints.
Well, I mean, those are obviously the goat of Girl Scout cookies, with Samoa as a close second. But
I
she
like the
didn't
peanut butter
specify.
ones.
Oh God. You're that guy.
I am that guy. I mean, the Thin Mints are number one. There's no
Yeah, thank
question.
you.
But
Thank you. You put them in
yeah.
the freezer. Oh,
Oh yeah.
too good.
Yeah.
Too good. This episode brought to you by Girl Scouts of America.
I wish. I'll take a sponsor. Let's
Yeah,
go.
no joke. We'll stack the cookies all the way. I'll cover all this stuff in the back. We'll have Girl Scout cookies everywhere.
I'm sure Skeletor would eat some.
Yeah, he might. For listeners that haven't watched it, I
Oh
have
right.
a
Yeah.
Skeletor costume that I built a few years ago behind me.
It's pretty
Um,
awesome.
yeah, so she just is like, they're like, "Would you like to buy some cookies?" And she's like, "Sure, I'll take 2 boxes." Although, to be fair, we don't know it at this point, but in about 2 seconds, it's going to be established that this is 1988. So maybe in 88, I mean, I was alive then, but I wasn't old enough to be ordering Girl Scout cookies. So maybe they only had one kind back then, but that seems unlikely.
That's a good point. I don't know. I do want to ask you this though. Did you find it weird or confusing at all that the time frame wasn't pointed out until the following scene?
Yeah, that was weird. Like,
I
why
thought,
wouldn't you just put that in right at the beginning of the movie?
well, because it threw me off because until the very end of the film, I thought that scene took place present day,
Right. Well, there's
right?
nothing, even throughout most of the movie, there's nothing that would give it away that this is 1988. I mean, most of the cars you see are kind of older. They reference some events.
There's no cell
Um,
phones.
there's no cell phones, true, but there's a lot of modern movies that don't have any cell phones. Um, he uses a rotary phone at one point, but really for wardrobe wise
Yeah.
and things like that, there's just not a lot that would tell you that this is 1988. So maybe in test screenings they thought that was not quite obvious enough, so that's why they put in the 1988 thing, and they just put it at the wrong scene. I don't know, but yeah,
Maybe that was the beginning of the movie originally, and they just didn't fix it when they added in that
maybe.
other scene.
But we get that fancy like stroking one of the girls' faces and telling her how adorable she is and getting like weirdly close to her.
Yeah.
And then that scene cuts out. Um, we get to see our first glimpse of 1988's long hair Cage. 1988 in the movie, not in real life. Um, I will say that there's been a lot of movies we've seen him in, but they did a really good job making him look different enough in
Yeah.
this movie. It wasn't like we were looking at our typical, Nick Cage. They really made him. I got a lot of Grand Theft Auto 5 vibes. That guy
Interesting.
that was in that
Yeah,
game, the dude I'm talking about, he was also
I
in The
do.
Walking Dead. I can't remember what the actor's name is, but he very much looked like what the stereotypical kind of Southern redneck guy would look like.
No, that's a good point. His beard is kind of like unkempt. His hair is long and not
Right.
really like put together. This is clearly a guy who's not taking a lot of pride in his appearance, which we
Right.
don't
And
get much from
if
Nick.
if I didn't emphasize this enough, this movie takes place in the South. And
Right.
I thought we were gonna get because Fancy has a fairly thick accent for a southern, like a fairly thick southern accent, not like Cajun, not we're not talking like Gambit level,
No,
but
it's not a
definitely
it's not
like
a
rogue
Creole type
level.
thing, but
Definitely
yeah,
like a rogue level if you're an X-Men fan of southern accent. Probably even a little thicker than rogue.
the rogue scale.
But
Well, and
Nick
Kelsey
was
Grammer's
pretty
got it
subtle.
too.
He does. He has like the very much like the Southern Baptist kind of,
Colonel
the
Sanders kind
draw,
of
like you got molasses in your mouth kind of
is very
Southern.
foghorn leghorn.
Yes, that's a good descriptor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually was really impressed with his accent because he did a good job keeping it consistent the whole time. Whereas, as much as I love Nick, the accent came and went throughout the movie. Um,
Well,
and his was
according
less subtle too,
yeah,
or more subtle. I should say it was like I didn't even tick the box for a weird accent because it wasn't weird. It was just a very subtle southern accent.
I think that's fair. It might have been a little inconsistent because according to reports, most of Nick Cage's lines were improvised.
I mean, that's fair.
So,
I would believe that based on the
yeah.
movie. Yeah, based on viewing the movie, I would believe that. I mean, he's a great actor. He said it a million times on this show. probably not a great writer. He should probably leave the writing and a lot of the improvising. He's not. We've seen a lot of improvising, especially in the more recent years in comedies and other movies. But a drama is not generally going to be the right place for improvising. And I think
Right.
that maybe he, and maybe it's not his fault. Maybe there wasn't really much of a script. Sometimes these indie movies, it kind of goes shot by shot, and you know,
Yeah. I mean, this was a troubled picture. It apparently ran out of money. And so they didn't even get to do the last 2 days of shooting that were planned. So,
yeah.
this was
So
definitely a fly by the seat of your pants kind of
they probably
production.
didn't have enough money to have a writer on set, and so when they decided to
Right.
modify things, they just let Nick go for it. And it wasn't terrible. He didn't do a horrible job, but I don't know that this is, that's not his strongest suit, I'll say.
No, I think that that's fair. And I mean, these writers, like they were new at this, right? There's two credited writers, Ivor William Jala and Rich Renat. And for both of them, I mean, this is like the movie that they've done,
Yeah, that's fair.
so, or at least the first movie that they've done. And it was directed by Stephen Campanelli, who has worked on a lot of big pictures. Like he worked on Million Dollar Baby and Mystic River, but not as the director. He was working in camera and electrical and things of that nature. So he's not really known for being a director.
Okay, good to
So
know. I mean,
yeah,
that starts to put some of the puzzle pieces together.
yeah.
But yeah, we see him. So it's kind of it's a nighttime situation. We see a guy kind of breaking. It looks like he's breaking into a house, and then it's seems to be Nick's house. He's Walter in this movie. Seems to be Walter's house, and he goes downstairs and he locks the front door so that the intruder can't get out. And then when the intruder kind of confronts him, they get into a little bit of a scuffle, and the intruder tries the door and can't get away. And so he runs jumps through a window and attempts to run away, and gets a gunshot to the back. And he smashes the fence in front of the house. And that's basically the last we see of him. There's some clues as to where he went later on, but it's not really confirmed.
Right.
Um, so yeah, then we cut to the real story of this movie, which is a guy that has been brought in to a police station for questioning regarding a murder. And we're not given any information as to who was murdered or anything like that. All the storytelling is done through essentially his story. But we get Kelsey Grammer, who's the police detective
Mm-hmm.
interrogator guy, in kind of an interrogation holding room type area with Buddy, who is the person who is accused of murder, who's all bloodied up.
Yeah.
Um,
He's in
Definitely
rough
been
shape.
through a scuffle. And at first, I don't know, maybe I was the only one that thought this, but did you think he was the guy that got shot running away from the crime?
I did. Yeah,
Yeah, me
I
too.
did. I
But
figured
then
that
he was
he,
talking really well, and like he didn't seem to have any trouble with his injuries. And if a guy got shot like that, I was like, there's no way he'd just be this open and friendly. Not friendly, but you know what I mean.
I was confused. I was like, well, maybe I didn't see it right. And he was shot like in the leg or something. And it just looked like the back and the way he fell. Like I started to question the previous scene, but not enough to roll it back.
Right. Well, I don't think we're meant to roll it back either. So, but yeah, this is a very, it takes place in the southern states. So, of course, the stereotypical police detective has to bring up, if he's a God-fearing man and, all this stuff. Uh, so I put, yeah, Christian interrogation for the note on that, because it was like he was in church, but like not a church where he's trying to give confession, but somebody's trying to like force him to give a
Mhm.
confession, which is exactly what happened. But it was very much a like God-based and religion-based interrogation.
Yeah.
Um, so we find out that because he starts telling the story, and it cuts to his memory, which is what the most of the movie is. And we find out that he's married and has a baby,
Hmm.
and his baby's sick, and he's hurting for money. He has a lot of ideas, for making money. He's constantly trying to make money through getting people to invest and things like that, and is unsuccessful. We find out that he hasn't been intimate with his wife in 6 months. It's basically since the baby was born. I
Hmm.
think we're led to
Yeah.
assume. Um, this at this point also, this is just a funny kind of tale from our viewing side, but the baby is meant to be sick in this scene, and so at one point they were like sitting around the baby and talking about the baby, and you hear the baby cough, and I go, I wonder how they make a baby cough for a movie. And my girlfriend, who has watched all these movies with me, she goes, I think they just add the sound effect in, Ryan. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's exactly what happens. I'm an idiot. So, this is where you come for the really deep criticisms and discussions of movies where we dig into the behind the scenes technology that makes babies coughing possible
Well,
in a
look, this
movie.
movie didn't have the budget for a trained coughing infant,
Baby, yeah, that's true.
so.
It didn't even have the movie for a real infant for a lot of the scenes. They just had like what was very clearly a doll. Um, but we'll get into that.
That's not
So
uncommon though.
no, but usually it's not super obvious, but it was very obvious in this. Uh, so Buddy gets a call about a job. He's apparently a fence builder.
I think he just
Um,
does odd jobs.
it says fences on the side of his truck.
Oh, does it
So
really? Good
yes.
catch. I missed that.
Yeah, I think I noticed that later in the movie, like at the very end of the movie, when you see his truck in like the main daylight at the
Gotcha.
end. We find out that he's like a fence guy, but yeah, he probably does odd jobs too, but his main business is fencing, not with a sword, but with fence posts.
That's a different movie.
Different movie. And probably Nick Cage was in that movie too, though. So he gets
Oh, he
called
could play like the
because
fencing coach. I would watch that.
I would too. He gets called because Nick Cage had to shoot a guy and the guy broke his
He
fence.
doesn't know that though.
But the guy doesn't know that. He just knows that there's a section of this fence that's broken down and covered in blood.
I don't
But
think
the
we see
blood
any
doesn't really.
blood.
We do. There's specifically one scene where the camera pans down and you see one of the picket, is that what they're called? The pickets, white
Sure.
picket fence, that has blood on the side, and he just
Huh.
doesn't look at it. But it was like Nick
Look
tried
at
to clean
you.
it up. Yeah, I mean it was obvious. I think you
I
were
missed
probably
it.
like, were you eating dinner during the movie or something, and you're
No,
just not paying
no.
attention?
I wasn't even snacking.
Because usually you catch stuff that I don't. So, but anyway, yeah, he goes out to Nick's house, which looks like some sort of former plantation or something. Like it's a big
Big
house.
house, yeah.
Um, and finds out that this fence is broken. And Nick says, "I will pay you whatever you ask for today if you get this fixed today." And we find out that there's a tsunami
A
or
hurricane.
hurricane or something coming.
So
I don't know.
hurricanes are the Western Hemisphere, right? Tsunami are the Eastern Hemisphere, or is it North South? It's
I
one
don't
of
know.
the
You're
two.
the one trying to teach
I now
everybody,
well
so
now I'm second guessing myself.
okay.
But
Well,
basically,
regardless, there's a
we get
big weather.
hurricanes.
There's
We
a
get
big
hurricanes.
weather event coming.
Yeah,
And Nick, for some reason, wants this fence fixed before this hurricane. It's really important to him that this gets done. And so,
I mean, I think it's an evidence thing. He wants the fence to look normal
yeah,
as soon as possible.
even though that has no payoff anywhere, that first crime really is never referenced again. It was just a crux for getting this guy over. Because we do find out also when he gets that phone call that this person specifically asked for Buddy, that Nick specifically asked for Buddy to come over.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, he starts to fix the fence, and I'm gonna say he's really bad at fence fixing. Like I'm not a fence guy, but first of all, he spent hours and got not one picket put up. Did you notice that when he goes
yeah.
up to the front door and is like, it's not fixed. It's not going to be able to be fixed today." Not one thing has been done on the fence. And even when he's like holding it up and starting to try and do it, the spacing is terrible, right? Like it sits even at the top, but the bottom has been cut way too short. And then the spacing between the pickets is terrible. I mean, I'm not a fence builder, but I think I could do a better job.
You wouldn't hire Buddy, is what you're
I would
saying.
not hire Buddy.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
buddy.
yeah. It's okay. Um, So yeah, during this conversation, my next note is huh, because you remember this. Nick Cage is like a very stoic character in this movie. Not a lot of words for at least this early part of the movie.
Mhm.
And Buddy and him are having a conversation, and at one point there's just like a really awkward silence for probably 7 or 8 seconds, and then he just does this like awkward laugh thing.
Well, because it comes out that they're both ex-military. Buddy was in the Navy, and Walter was in the Marines. And Walter keeps calling Buddy a tadpole
Yeah.
or something like that. And Buddy's trying to kind of get back at him a little bit. So he's like, "Hey, what is it they call you Marines?" And Walter makes some comment threateningly about not, better not call him a jarhead. And that's where the pause happens. And he's like, just
No, he
screwing with
doesn't
you.
laugh though. He just does like haha twice.
I know.
Like
I can't do it. I can't.
it's like yeah, it just ends so abruptly. It's very weird.
It was
Nick was
weird.
definitely trying something here. I'm not sure if it was successful. It's not the only time he does that in the movie.
I mean, I think it works for the character by
At
the end
least
of the
it's
movie. Like,
consistent for the character. It's not
yeah,
like a one-off thing.
exactly.
But yeah, former military, you kind of covered that. Which is also a slot on our bingo card, I think.
It
Oh no,
is.
it isn't.
It's not
Nope.
government or
Um,
military. I thought it was a
Government or military employee is, but not former government or military employee.
oh, that's a little semantic.
But the other one, the other one specifies Nick is a current or former criminal.
I
So it's
think
not
that's
semantic, it's your writing.
I think that's because originally we had put former criminal, and then we wanted to emphasize that if at any point he's a criminal,
I'm
it
going by your
counts.
rules that you
Okay.
wrote. Um, so at one point while he's fixing the fence, um, Fancy comes out and is very flirtatious, like thirsty. She wants this dude's dong so bad, like she can barely stand it. She,
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen in any of his movies so far a more obvious example of like just somebody being so thirsty.
Well, we find out later kind of why,
Yeah,
but
because she has a reason, but still, it's like guys are stupid. So he probably didn't even second guess this. He's like, this chick really wants to bang me. And keep in mind, they had established that he had this 6 months has had this 6 month period of dryness,
mhm.
nothing going on. So he's all horned up. He's
I think
got that poison in him.
he does. I think it is worth noting that she is 20 years older than Buddy, but 11 years younger than Walter.
So we get to mark the box, love interest 10 years or older or more
Yes.
younger than him. Yeah. Which we weren't sure about. So we had to look it up. But yeah, that is the fact. And I will say, just right out of the gate, I didn't know this actress from anything, but she was really good in this movie.
She was. Yeah.
I was very impressed.
Yeah.
Um,
KaDee Strickland, she was stellar, I thought, in this. She's been in a bunch of stuff over the years.
but nothing really huge.
I mean, she was in The Grudge, she was in Fever Pitch. Those are pretty,
I guess I'm not really a horror movie kind of guy, so I guess The
she
Grudge was never really my thing.
she was in the Stepford Wives, the remake of the Stepford Wives.
Okay, so she's been in some big stuff, I guess, just not stuff that I'm interested in for
Yeah,
the most
right.
part.
Yeah, which
But she
happens,
was very good in this movie.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, when she's walking away in her tight dress, after giving him some sweet tea or lemonade or something,
It was just iced tea.
whatever. Yeah, if it's Southern, it's probably not sweet tea. It's probably unsweetened iced tea. Because people are weird down there. He's staring at her butt and smashes his thumb with the hammer, as all the best craftsmen do.
Well,
Just
now,
more evidence of his incompetence.
to be fair, he's only been doing this for a few months because he was in the Navy. Though I would
Okay,
hope that he would know how to use a hammer.
but it's legitimately his profession. He's good
I
enough at it that
know.
he put it on the side of his truck. Anyway, he goes
Poor
in the
guy.
house, or she hears that happen, and she's like, "Oh, nobody's gonna be hurt at my place without the queen taking care of him." And so she brings him into the house and is like, you know, kissing his thumb and stuff. And Nick shows up and he's just like hanging out in the doorway watching it happen. In the most awkward possible moment, he's like, "What's going on in here?" And
Just like that.
just like that,
Oh
and
man.
it's really awkward. He's like, "Oh, I just hurt my hand, and now I'm gonna go finish your fence." Spoiler alert: he does not finish the fence because he's a terrible craftsman that should have never been hired in the first place. Um, my next note is sitting in corner with sunglasses on.
Yep.
Because I is this during the storm?
No. So this is a separate scene. So basically what happens I well, now you've got me a little confused because I feel like this happened a lot earlier in the movie. But so Fancy gets all dressed up.
Okay, yeah,
Uh,
this might have happened. That this might have happened before the seductive thumb thing.
yeah, I think this is before Buddy actually gets to the house because it's Walter and Fancy's anniversary. I believe it's their 15th anniversary. And she gets all dressed up in sexy stuff and she goes down to like, seduce her husband. And she doesn't find out kind of till she's been doing that for a minute that he's passed out drunk in the chair because he's got sunglasses on. Is that what the scene you're talking about?
Maybe. I don't know, but Buddy was definitely there at this
Hmm.
point. So whenever I wrote that, so
Maybe he
but
did
yeah,
it a
it
second
doesn't matter.
time
It was just a weird, awkward thing. He's sitting in the corner of a room with his sunglasses on inside.
because he's drunk, passed out.
Yeah.
He drinks a lot in this movie.
Um, I have this line here that was from the movie. Birds are smart because they leave before the storm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. She says that to Buddy because of the
Yeah.
hurricane.
So not only is she brilliant seductress, but also a bird expert, an ornithologist who knows all the facts about birds and why they leave before a storm.
So in the moment, it was working for me because I thought this movie was going in a very different direction. I thought because I still thought the beginning of the movie was present day, and then we were getting like a flashback to the 80s. I thought with that and some other things that happened shortly after this, I thought we were going to have some supernatural stuff going on where she was like,
A bird?
200 years old or something.
Wow, you really went a different direction
I
with
did.
what you thought this movie was. Well, I guess after watching Knowing, you never really know where a movie is going.
Well, because
Um,
there's some stuff that hasn't happened yet that just led me to believe like some type of supernatural magic type stuff would be involved.
the dolls
The dolls,
that
yes,
never get
yes,
explained.
exactly. Yeah, that's a big
Um,
part of it. The fact she's talking about how like the house has been in her family for generations. She's
well,
talking
she
about
says
how,
150 years. Yeah,
well, that's a lot of
that would
generations.
be a few generations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's talking about she can't medically have kids. She seems to hate her husband, but she keeps him around for some reason. And I'm like, okay, so if she's there in present day and looks exactly the same in 1988 with all this other stuff, maybe she's like really, really old. But then
Spoiler
obviously
alert, that's not the
that's
case.
not what it is. But
But yeah, at this point, I had Nick's accent comes and goes because it really started to be obvious at a certain point for me.
maybe it depends
Um,
how much she's been drinking.
maybe. We get a nice scene of him smoking a cigar, which I know Derek's a big cigar fan, so he was probably watching this going, man, I wish I had that stogie because it was a thick boy. That was one thick stogie.
I mean, it was a pretty normal looking cigar.
Oh, I don't know. For a guy that doesn't smoke, it was like it looked like he had a tree branch in his
Oh
mouth.
my God.
But then so he
I like how
notices
I have like one or two cigars a year, but that makes me like a really big cigar guy.
compared to me, that makes you like the world's biggest cigar aficionado. You
Yeah,
don't
I
need to
guess.
defend yourself. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a cigar twice a year, Derek.
No, I know,
Not a personal insult,
I know.
not a
I'm fine.
character insult. Okay.
I'm good.
Moving on. So he has just seen his wife like trying to be flirty. I don't know if he we're led to believe that he actually thinks she wants to fuck this guy, or if it's just like she's just being flirty to make him jealous or something.
Right.
Maybe they have some sort of relationship where she flirts with the young guys that come by and that really turns him on. So then they could have crazy times later or whatever. We don't really know at
Oh,
this
wow.
point.
Look at you
That's a
just coming up
thing.
with theories, man.
That's a thing. I mean, in real life, I not for me, but for some people, I'm sure.
I thought they
Um,
just hated each other, and so she was just trying to piss him off.
I mean, that definitely seems to be what the actual thing we're supposed to think is. But yeah, he goes down by Buddy, and well, Buddy's working on the fence. Mind you, still hasn't done a single thing to it, but he's doing something out there near the fence. Nick goes and puts some empty beer bottles on the fence, and then goes up to the roof and starts sniping them. It looks
Now,
like a video game.
I gotta ask you this: when he starts putting the beer bottles in the fence, did you know what was about to happen? Because I knew
No,
it was okay. I guess I just guessed it right. But in my head, I'm like, look, Buddy's like this Navy guy. How is he not understanding what's about to happen?
it was a weird scene, but basically he wanted to scare Buddy. In which he does several times throughout this movie, where he just like has a gun and like is trying to be intimidating.
I mean, it
Um,
works. Buddy
yeah, it
seems
does.
intimidated.
Yeah, Buddy is freaked out because he just starts shooting these bottles that are like a foot away from his head.
Well, the glass starts hitting him.
Yeah, the glass starts hitting him. But yeah, I had my note, dude sucks at fence repair, which I'd already kind of covered. And of course the tsunami comes in.
Hurricane.
The tsunami comes in and
They say hurricane like 10 times in this movie.
mm, agree to disagree. But it starts pouring, like it's raining really bad as it does in a tsunami. And um he goes to the door and is like, I didn't finish your fence. And Nick's like, well, I'm only giving you $100 then. And he's like, really? It's the weather. Otherwise I would have fixed it. And he's like, well, you didn't get it done in time per our agreement, so I'm only giving you $100. He was supposed to get 250. And Buddy's like, okay, fine. And leaves, goes out to his car to try and leave. And here's a big twist: the car won't start. Who could have ever guessed that was going to happen? And so he runs back in and says he needs to call or he asks if he can use Nick's car, Walter's car,
Mhm.
and go home. And this is our second of the movie. He asks if he can borrow Nick's car to go home and check on his wife and child who's sick. And Nick is like, you think I'm just going to let you run off with my 68 Mach 1 Mustang when you didn't even repair my fence or something along those lines?
Yeah.
It's really important that we know he has a 68 Mach 1 Mustang for whatever reason. I don't know if it's a 68, but he says Mach 1 Mustang. He's very specific in what this car is.
Mhm.
Um,
I'll
and
tell
so
you what. After my experience, if I was Buddy, after the experiencing what I've experienced with these two people, I'm gonna walk home in the rain.
it's not a rain, it's a tsunami, Derek. It's a big weather event.
It's going to be a hurricane, but hurricanes take time. So at that moment, I don't know how big of a town this is, right? This is a
Well, he says
1980.
he lives all the way across the town.
Well, you
So
know what? Find another house, find a store, a shop, a something
they
that
specifically say that he can't call a taxi because of the weather,
that's fine. But there are other people who are alive in this town who are not giving off the same vibes. That's all I'm saying.
the swinger vibes.
No, the I'm going to shoot you in the face vibes
Oh,
because you're screwing with my wife.
yeah, I guess that's probably true. But yeah, he gives that thing again with bringing up the Mustang. He calls his wife, Buddy calls his wife, and his wife is pissed at him, of course. And Walter offers Buddy wine, and Buddy says he doesn't drink. And Walter's like, well, what the hell else are you gonna do? Um, it's storming or whatever.
I
And
I personally felt like his wife was a little extra mean to him on the phone.
yeah, I thought that was uncalled for.
Because
Like, listen, I get it. You're stuck at home. I mean, I don't get it because I don't have a kid, but I can imagine that getting stuck at home with a sick kid while your spouse is on the other side of town in a massive mansion, you know,
It
partying.
sucks. It sucks, right? But she pressured him to take the job, right?
Yeah,
He
I
took
thought
the
that was just poor writing.
yeah. I didn't her name is Lisa. Is just a very unlikable character.
And she could have been supportive and been like, "You're trying to support our family." Like that would have been way more believable, and it wouldn't have affected the movie at all, really.
No, it would have been
Um,
better for me for what happens later. But by
yeah,
the time later happens, she's just been kind of mean the two
yeah,
times
we
we've
just
seen
don't
her.
like her already.
So yeah,
Yeah. So then they sit down to have dinner, Walter and Fancy and Buddy. And
is that an awkward awkward diner scene?
no, but I think there is an awkward diner scene later. But yeah, in fact, I know there is. But yeah, so Fancy at one point steps away. She's being very flirtatious and asking about him, and she steps away to go do something, and then
She gets some mint
Buddy,
juleps.
yeah, Buddy or Walter says he can tell that Buddy hasn't gotten any in a while and has the poison in him, and asks him how long it's been since he had his dick sucked or something like that.
Oh, that's what it asks.
Is that was exactly what he asked? I couldn't
I
remember if that was exactly what he asked or
Yeah,
not, but
that's
yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah.
and he doesn't really answer. He kind of stutters around, but then Fancy comes back, and immediately Walter's like, "Oh, he's having some trouble with his wife. Hasn't gotten any in a while." Or something like that. And it's just a very awkward conversation. Then she starts rubbing his crotch with her foot, which is again the most stereotypical thing. And somehow Walter, doesn't notice this, or maybe he does, and it's part of what the ultimate plan is.
Look,
But
man,
at
their
a certain point, you have
relationship,
to wonder what the full plan really was when we get to that twist. But we'll get to that.
I don't understand their relationship.
He goes and passes out somewhere. And she's like, "Oh, do you want a tour of the house, specifically my vagina?" And he's like, "Okay, I guess." And so they wander around the house and they go by the basement door, which he's suspicious about. And, I didn't understand his suspicion at all, except for the fact that it had 17 locks on it,
Like it might
like
as well
any
have had
normal
a
basement.
giant "Do not enter"
Right,
flashing
like a
sign.
neon sign above it. Yeah, if you're trying to hide whatever crimes or whatever supernatural thing is happening down there, maybe don't make it so obvious that you have something going on. It's literally like four deadbolts on this thing. Um,
And it has a padlock too.
as a padlock. Yeah, there's so many locks on this.
So many.
Um, but he's like, "What's going on down there?" And she's like, "Dark stuff, twisted stuff. You don't want to go down there." And he's like, "Whoa." And she's like, "Oh, I'm just kidding. That's just our basement," or something like that. Like
Yeah, it's just
she brushes
storage.
it off. Storage. Yeah, that's what she says. And then she takes him upstairs to Buddy's favorite room, which is apparently an alcoholic's paradise.
Well, no, no.
Because,
So Walter's favorite room is on the
or
first floor.
Walter's favorite room.
Yeah,
Oh, is
it's
that
like
one
a
on the
bar.
first
It's
floor?
like the bar
Yeah, yeah.
area across from the room where he's passed out in. When they go upstairs, that's Fancy's favorite room.
Right. It has a bath and like
I think it's just her
bed and
room.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, she's like, "Oh, just let me slip into something more comfortable." And keep in mind at this point she's in like a very form-fitting dress. And so she goes behind the very stereotypical like folded curtain thing that you see in like medieval movies. But apparently they also used those in the South in 1988.
I mean, at
Um,
least they didn't steer into the like shadowed vignette of her like
Well,
naked body.
no, but you could
Yeah.
see like there were cracks in the in between the curtain things, and you could, see a little bit there. So they were still playing into that a little bit. And at one point, you see a piece of clothing like fly up and lay over the top, like the most stereotypical thing. And then she comes out in like this slinky lingerie type outfit,
It's a nightgown.
whatever. It's very breasts forward. I'll
It
say
is
that.
not what you would typically wear around someone you've just met that you're
Right. You
not
would wear
trying to
this to
date.
somebody that you would like to suck the life out of, I imagine, as a woman. I'm not a woman, but if I was, I imagine this would be my choice.
Good to
And
know.
so Yeah. I'm glad you know that about me now and all the listeners out there. But yeah, so she takes him over and like has him sit down on this thing.
Don't forget that this is where we get kind of like the first real acknowledgement of the dolls.
Right.
Because she's got
He's
a bunch
looking
of
at
these
one,
like
isn't he?
they're in her room and they're like they kind of come off like voodoo dolls,
That's what I thought they were at first.
but yeah, so he asks like if they have kids because there's like a photo of some kids and there's these dolls, and that's when you learn that she can't have children.
Well, so just to clarify about the dolls, they aren't like dolls that like a little girl would play with. They're like
Right.
handmade looking,
Like
like
wicker and
right, like when you said voodoo dolls, very much like what you would expect or think about when you think of voodoo doll, that kind of thing. And I think we also saw her pick one up after the Girl Scout cookies thing in the very
yeah.
beginning of the movie. So you had already seen a doll at this point, but then yeah, you see many more at this point. And so she starts talking about his wife and how she hasn't been taking care of him and how she's like, I don't know how a woman couldn't take care of a man like you, and laying it on very thick. And she asks him
It's
if
working for me, Ryan.
yeah, you like that, if he's ever fantasized about an older woman. And she talks about how she's had so many fantasies about a younger man, but she's never fulfilled them, and asks if he wants to hear about it. And it's basically like listening to audio erotica. It's just her describing a dude going down on her, and
Yep.
in pretty graphic detail. Um, and she asks if he wants her to keep going, and she's like rubbing his crotch. So his monkey brain kicks in, and something happens, and there's like they make a big sound by accident. I can't remember what happened.
Well, he decides to get up. He realizes what's happening, kind of thing. He's brought back to reality, but he trips and falls. So he falls onto the floor, which wakes up Walter.
Right.
So you've got Buddy
That's
lying
what
on his
happened.
back
Oh,
on
and she pops the button off his pants
with her heel.
with her heel. I'm going to be honest, that was super impressive, except for the fact that I know it was movie magic. But if somebody could really do that, she also undoes a zipper that same way, but you can tell that it just like it was a Velcro that made it look like a zipper, but it was pretty impressive. And the button that she pops off, they make a big deal of showing it like
Huge
rolling
deal.
by the door, and it doesn't actually, nothing actually happens. Also, at this point, when she's telling this whole fantasy, my next note, and I can prove this if you want to see this, I wrote, this was definitely written by a man. This was definitely a woman written by a man.
Well, yeah, but I think that's the point, though, right? Is that she's trying to manipulate him.
I don't know.
She's not actually interested.
I guess it was more for me just like this is written like what a man would think a woman wants to think about to get turned on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just think that's partly the point.
I don't think it is. I disagree
Okay.
because I feel like she could have just said anything sexy at that point and he would have been in. It didn't need to be like it
uh,
was. But yeah, Nick Cage Walter wakes up because he hears the bang upstairs and he's wandering around. Um and nothing happens. But at this point, Buddy is freaked out enough that he leaves and goes down to the couch to sleep
mhm.
on the first floor. And he wakes up to Walter sitting in the corner of the room on like a swivel chair with a pistol.
Yep.
It's not really pointed at him or anything. It's just kind of there. Um, but yeah, it's a point. And he's scared. He thinks, "Oh shit, this guy knows that I almost banged his wife upstairs. Um, let's just take it easy." And so he's definitely on edge in the way he's talking and responding.
Mhm.
But Nick is like, "Let's go have a chat." And he takes him up to the attic, which seemed like a really suspicious thing for Buddy to be okay with.
I think Buddy just thinks he's going to get killed, and so he's trying to stay alive as long as
So
possible.
he's like, "Yeah, let's go to the kill attic, the death attic, where who are closest to the storm and everything."
Buddy
But
makes some poor decisions in this movie, man.
very poor decisions. But yeah, so they sit down, and it turns out Walter just wants to have a chat with him in a room full of guns. But yeah, he asks him about his service, and or Walter reveals that he didn't really get to see any service in Vietnam because uh, of a training accident where a grenade went off and shrapnel got him, and he wasn't allowed to deploy out with his squad.
And his
This
whole squad died,
his whole squad died, and he should have died with him or something like
which
that.
is very similar to Wind Talkers, which we just did like, 2 episodes ago.
Yeah, that's true. Weird coincidence. Also, the Mustang, the classic Mustang, is kind of a thing for Gone in 60 Seconds, which
Oh
is
yeah,
also
right.
interesting.
Eleanor,
Yeah. Of course, that was GT 500, but whatever.
similar,
Similar. They are both Mustangs.
right?
But yeah, so he asks Buddy about his service, and do we ever really get an answer as to what this whole thing? We know that
Yeah.
like some dudes caught on fire and he got away, but
So their boat was hit with some missiles and started to sink, and there was a big fire.
they make it seem like there's some big conspiracy happening, or like the things on the boat were something secret. I don't know. I got the vibes that Walter seemed like he was trying to find out some sort of something.
Oh, no, because I think he thinks that Buddy's lying.
Gotcha. Because there's apparently news coverage of this,
Yeah.
and that's why Buddy or Walter knew to get Buddy because he knew he was a part of this,
Hmm.
um, and wanted to talk about it. But in any case, up in the attic, they're kind of bonding, and Buddy goes and grabs a duffel bag, and he throws it at Buddy's feet, and it's just full of money, as you would guess. And he basically tells Buddy, "I need you to kill my wife. She has blood cancer, and I can't bear to see her suffer. So I just want her to be put out of her misery, and I just don't have the cojones to do it." And so he gives them like a thing of cyanide and a rag, which I don't know if that's how cyanide works. You have to put it on a cloth and cover somebody's mouth with it. Actually, that may be the point because of the twist that we get later is that he knew it wouldn't actually.
Right.
Anyway,
I mean,
but
the
yeah,
stuff would still hurt you. Like if it got on your skin, it wouldn't feel good.
well, except
But
that we'll go over that later. We'll get into that
yeah.
later. But yes, at this point, we see the cyanide, and he tells him to just pour it on the cloth and cover her mouth with it, and she'll die peacefully, not knowing what's happening. So he's like, I don't know, and then he manipulates him, and he's like, okay, I'll do it. Because he wants to take care of his wife and his kid, and all his money problems would be solved. $20,000 in 1988 is a good amount of money nowadays, equivalent. So, um, he says he'll do it. So, of course, when he goes back downstairs to do it, she's in the bath because why wouldn't she be in like a classic clawed bathtub?
Right
With
as a hurricane is
candles,
rolling in.
right as a hurricane, a tsunami is rolling in, and then there's candles everywhere. And she's listening to something, and I don't know, it's a very seductive situation. And so she starts asking him about his mom, like right out of the gate. Talk about the sexiest conversation. When you're really trying to get somebody in the mood when you're in the bathtub, just ask them about their mom and dad.
Well, she's trying to get him to be vulnerable. She's
Yeah.
like, this is all emotional manipulation,
For sure. Yeah. And so he does open up, and we get, this is kind of the classic trope where the person has to go kill or injure somebody, but instead of just doing it, they spend some time talking to him, and you get like a bunch of bathtub exposition in this case, and now you care about that person too much to do what you're supposed to do, which is very much a trope in movies and television.
Totally.
And then they bang, but we don't
Right
get to
there in
see
the
it. We
bathroom.
we don't see it. But you wake or you see them after it's all done, and as he's getting dressed, realizing what just happened, even though he was an active participant in what happened, I don't know why it was such a surprise to him. But I think it was because he heard Walter walking around or something. But she sees the cyanide fall out of his pants, and so when she finds it and asks him about it, he says, "Do you really have cancer?" And she's like, "What did he tell you?" And so now she says, okay, well, I'm gonna take care of this. She doesn't have cancer. And they both go downstairs, and she's talking to Walter and going, I Walter, she so first she goes and pours him a drink or brings him a drink, and you think, well, maybe she poisoned this drink. At least that's what I thought.
Yeah, I did too, especially the
Because he
way
like,
he was drinking
yeah,
it.
he like chugs it,
Yeah, totally.
which he's an alcoholic, so whatever. But um, she's like, I just want to. It sounds it does do a good job of making you believe that she's trying to get all their issues out in the open and make them better before he dies.
I mean, again, I think she's just a really good actor, and I think she
Yes.
nailed this role.
Well, that's what we're led to believe is happening. She's killing him, and uh now she's trying to like just settle things with her conscience before he dies. And he doesn't die from that. And at some point, she's basically asking him like, I just want to forgive you, and I just want it to go back to what it used to be, and I love you so much, that kind of stuff. And then out of the blue, she pulls out a knife and stabs his hand into the window,
Yeah,
into like the window frame, which isn't a great move if you want to kill somebody. In general, you would go for something more vital than the middle of their hand. Um,
ideally.
yeah. So then he like backhands her and knocks her out, and Buddy starts fighting him. And at one point, he slings the cyanide into his eyes,
Yeah,
and then knocks him out and ties him up to the stairs.
right.
But this is where I'm like, that clearly wasn't cyanide because first of all, if you put cyanide on a rag, I don't think it's going to kill you. I'm not going to Google that because I don't need to be on a watch list. But also, he slings this bottle of cyanide into Walter's eyes, and I would think getting cyanide into a mucous membrane like your eyes would be enough to kill you, similar to ingesting it. It
I
goes
mean,
into your
I
bloodstream.
at a minimum, I would think it's got to do some damage to your eyes.
Yeah, you would think.
You know,
But
he's
it
mostly
doesn't.
fine,
Yeah, he's great. In fact, better than ever. Other than having the shit kicked out of him
and a hole in his hand.
and a hole in his hand. Um, yeah, cyanide to the eyes. But so then Fancy wakes up and sees her husband tied up, and Buddy is telling her what happened and asking if she's okay, and she's literally trying to fuck him right in front of her husband.
Yeah, she kind of goes off the rails at this point as a character.
Yeah. Um, and so they're like, he's like, I'm gonna take your car and I'm gonna drive away. And she's like, well, come with me. And or I'll come with you. Please, can I come with you? She's begging to go with him, and he's like, sure. And then Walter's like, well, if you don't know her dark side, go look in the basement. And so all of a sudden, Buddy's like, oh yeah, I should look in the basement. And so he goes over to the door, and she's like, no, don't go into the basement, please. Let's just get out of here. Let's just get out of here. And he starts to try and unlock all the things, and she pulls a gun and shoots at him.
Mm-hmm.
And he runs into like a closet or something.
No, it's a room. It's a whole room that's just
Is
like
it?
packed with stuff. It's all wrapped in plastic.
But
You
it's
know,
not blocked off or locked in any way.
correct.
And so at this point, we see a shot of Walter with Fancy, and they're discussing how she didn't have to stab him so hard or something like that. And he's like, "Well, you didn't." Well, or he's like, she's like, "Well, you didn't have to hit me so hard." And it's basically revealed at this point that they had planned at least some of this.
And look, man, I don't understand what it is they were planning. What
It's
was the
unclear.
plan?
I guess I should mention that because I didn't take a note on this, but earlier in the movie, I think when they first maybe Buddy first comes into the kitchen or something, there's a TV on and they're talking about four missing teenagers.
Yeah.
Which seems really out of the blue in the moment because there's been no reference or anything to anything like that. But you get the news talking about four teenagers. This is the fourth teenager to go missing in the last few weeks or whatever, and then they shut the TV off. Um, but yeah, at this point, you have to start thinking about the movie and even talking to you because I hadn't really gone back through it. You kind of think like what exactly was the that of what happened? What was the stuff that was the plan? Like,
Right.
was it part of the plan for her to fuck Buddy right in front of him? Was that something that they wanted to happen?
Or at all. Like, was the plan because they do sleep together,
Yeah.
right? That
Or was he says you didn't have to stab me so hard. Did he expect her to just like nick his hand with it? And then was he supposed to fully knock her out? You know what I mean? There's just a lot of stuff that leads up to this.
well, and then at the same time, was the plan was that they knew Buddy would take too long to do the fence, so he'd get stuck there?
Well, I think that that was more believable because they could, assume that it was a bigger repair than what could be done in that time. And that's why he kind of refuses it at first.
Did they sabotage the truck?
The truck, yes, obviously.
I mean, I don't know that it's obvious because nothing's ever shown that it's actually sabotaged.
No, but I mean, it's implied that they had all this whole big elaborate plan. I think pulling some spark plugs or something is not outside the realm of possibility. I mean, I imagine that Walter did it while she was bandaging his thumb. Although then that leads to the question: how did they make it? How did they make it known that he was going to smash his thumb with a hammer when she walked away and be pulled inside the house? You know
That's
what I
the
mean? There's
thing.
just a
It
lot of
doesn't.
stuff that's very circumstantial. But this is not the first time we've seen this in Nicolas Cage movies that have like some
No,
sort of big twist at the end. There's a lot of them where we're like,
I
how did they plan that? That's not possible.
I agree. Like, I don't mind the twist as much as I just don't understand the plan.
There was no plan, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
But so when he runs into this room, uh, it's dark, it's dusty, whatever else. And keep in mind, this room is not locked. There's a person on the ground alive attached to an IV, and there's a bunch of drugs, like pill bottles around him, which is
Mhm.
not how you do an IV. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but
Don't know.
um,
The guy
he's
can
he
barely
can
talk.
he can barely talk. He's clutching a piece of cloth MacGuffin in his hand. The crux of the whole movie is
Oh my
clutched in
god,
his hand.
that's funny.
And the guy is like, "Help me! I'm not the only one," and he can't say anything other than that, and can't yell at all throughout any of this movie, even though he's in a room that's unlocked. Um, but yeah, he sees the cloth in his hand, and then eventually she unties Walter, and they go like looking for Buddy. Let's see, where am I at my notes? Because I've been not going off the notes for a lot of this. Um,
It's a very kind of wild thing, and then it leads to other questions later, like why wasn't this guy down in the basement with the rest?
yeah, so why wasn't the store locked if it's so important? I mean, these people are shown that they can be immaculate planners, but there's a lot of stuff that starts to fall apart at this point. And so going back a little bit, when he starts trying to unlock the doors, I immediately went, it's definitely the missing teens in the basement, isn't it?
It's
Because
yeah.
what
Well,
else would it be? There's this offhanded mention of four teens,
right.
and this basement is locked. What else is it going to be down there? I mean,
Well,
it's definitely darker than just that, but
yeah. I assumed that the guy that Buddy finds was the kid who got shot and broke the fence.
yeah, I mean, it's not again. You were okay with that, but you weren't okay with the fact that they sabotaged the truck because it's not explicitly laid out for that either. Where would
No,
she have
but
got? Where would he have gotten that cloth?
well, that's the thing. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? But like, why would they keep him separate from the others unless it was last minute,
Right.
right? So I
Well,
it does.
or also if they ran out of room down in the basement.
I suppose like but it still would be that guy, right? Because that would have been the most recent one,
Yeah.
right? So like, to me, it just that logically, it's probably that guy, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, that's never confirmed. But uh we get a bad action sequence. I did mark that box for this one because there's a really bad like jump cuts all the time, shaky cam fight between Buddy and Walter.
Aw, I didn't think
And
it was that bad.
it was pretty bad. And he gets knocked out, Buddy does. And with the next scene, we see him waking up in his truck, which is wrecked on the side of a road, with the body of that guy that he was talking to, with a bullet, like a bullet hole in the front of his head. And so we figure that, and the police showing
I
up.
mean, he wakes up just as the police are pulling up. If he had
Right.
woken up 10 minutes earlier,
Well, it's probably
you
the
know,
sirens that woke him up, Derek.
eh,
So then, throughout this, we've cut to Kelsey Grammer in like the modern time. Well, not modern times, but the like current times of the movie, not a flashback.
current
Um,
1988.
right. Several times. And at this point, it's, Kelsey Grammer does not believe him. You
Straight up.
know, he's like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. They're not even going to investigate it.
Yeah.
Like, they're just going to take him in and say, all the evidence points to you. Sorry. So then they let his wife come in, and his wife is like, "What the fuck is going on?" And he's like, "They got me in here for murder, but don't worry, I didn't do it. Just get me out of here, and I'll explain everything later." Which again is another trope. Just tell her now, at least the short story version of it, and so that she can believe you. But apparently, the police have already told her that he cheated on her, which seems like a really irresponsible move by the cops.
No, 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 no. It's a shitty move, but it's very calculated. Because Kelsey Grammer's character is convinced that Buddy did it. And he wants this dude arrested and convicted for murder. What better way to do that than to help like get his wife against him? To get away allies. Like that's his only
It's
ally,
just
his
not very
only like hope.
scrupulous. He doesn't have scruples for doing that because at least get him on the merit of the crime and not by manipulating someone
Oh, but
into.
he doesn't care about that because he has that whole speech about how this isn't like the big cities where you get a phone call and
I mean, that's true.
all that and a lawyer, like he's trying to not do things the right way.
Right. So while this is going on, it's revealed that somebody was watching behind the glass, watching the interrogation this whole time behind the
We've
glass.
seen her a couple of times, but she's never spoken.
Right. And she at some point he brings up that cloth before the wife comes in. He brings up the cloth he saw in the guy's hand, and that person behind the glass is like, well, we have a missing persons case where we're wearing this exact dress, and she's been missing for 2 weeks. And Kelsey Grammer's like, no way. And he goes and shows the guy the picture of the woman wearing that
No,
dress.
it's just a picture of the fabric. There's no
Oh, is
person
it?
attached to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he shows him a picture of the fabric, which I mean, I feel like most times the cops wouldn't just have a picture of the fabric of the dress in their file, but in this case they do. And he's like, yeah, that's definitely the dress. That's definitely the fabric I saw. And so now they're going to go investigate the house, but not Kelsey Grammer,
Oh no.
four random nameless cops and that woman.
Yes, police one and police two
Yes.
both get to go. That's the official credit
Um,
for these guys.
so they go in there and they're like, we have a search warrant, and they have two of the cops stay with Walter and Fancy, and then two of the cops to go execute the search warrant in the house. And in this town, they cannot afford any type of radio, any type of communication device. The only way they can talk is if they're in the same room within eyesight of each other.
This part of the movie
It falls apart.
kind of pissed me off
These are the
because
world's dumbest
the
cops.
worst cops, so
And
terrible.
we've seen some really bad cops in these Nick Cage movies.
Because like up until this point, like the plan didn't really make sense to me, but like I was kind of like I was in, I wanted to see what was going to happen. I was like engaged. And then these cops are just so bad at their job.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, here's the thing. People that weren't alive in 1988 might go, well, they didn't have cell phones back then. They probably didn't have radios like they do now or anything like that. They did have radios like that. But I mean, they weren't like they are now. They were big, like handheld radios, but they did have those. And they went long distances. If you watch Ghostbusters in 1984, they carried radios.
Right.
And they're Ghostbusters, not police officers. So police officers have access to communication devices. They just decided not to use them, I guess, or they can't afford them in this small town. So anyway, these two cops go search the house, and eventually they come across the basement that this guy described, even though they probably don't know that this guy described the basement because they weren't there for the interrogation, and Kelsey Grammer's also not there. Although I guess the woman would be, but she was watching the guy,
Yeah. Her and the only
Fancy.
named officer, Officer Garrett, and Detective Newton they
Right.
are watching Walter and Fancy.
And Fancy offers them a drink immediately, of course, and she's like, "Well, I guess bourbon wouldn't be
Appropriate.
appropriate." Yeah. And so the other two cops go down to the basement, and we never see them again the entire movie. And so instead of like yelling and going, "Hey, are you guys okay?" or doing anything that would resemble actual police work, she just walks off and leaves this one cop with two potential murderers or kidnappers or whatever, they're being accused of. So she goes down to the basement. This is the weirdest fucking basement I've ever seen. It looked like they were just walking down the hallway of another building because it wasn't like an open basement. It was literally like a hallway with a bunch of metal doors.
But somehow she got past the two officers that went down first
I guess.
because
I
she's the
mean,
one who's investigating the doors. So where'd the other guys go?
it's unclear at this point. But she goes to try and open one of the doors, and all of a sudden there's like a big bang, and somebody saying, "Get me out of here!" And and so of course that this is going to happen because everybody's leaving. But the other cop that's watching Fancy and Walter is like backing up out of the room and like looking down the hallway, and Walter's like, "I'm not going down for your bullshit, Fancy." And she's like, "No, I'm not leaving my house." And so he goes and like clocks the cop and runs out into his Mustang and drives away.
Yep.
And she gets arrested.
Because she didn't want to
Uh,
leave the house because it's her family's house.
right.
Like
Yeah.
somehow that changes anything about what's going to happen.
Then we get a random helicopter shot, which I thought was
Yay.
the end of the movie. I
I
literally put in
know,
my
right?
notes closing helicopter shot. I thought the movie was just going to end with him getting away, Fancy getting arrested, and Buddy getting his name cleared. Because at this point, Kelsey Grammer comes in and is like, "You are free to go." And he's like, "Well, do I get to know what happened at least? What was in that basement?" And Kelsey Grammer's like, "Nightmares," or something like
Nightmares.
that.
Yeah, no, he
Yeah,
says night and whatever the southern accent is,
right. Yeah. So then we get the awkward diner scene of Buddy in a diner some amount of time later. His wife has left him with the kid. When Buddy got released, there was a scene of him like taking a taxi back to his house and her leaving in her little pickup with the baby.
Mhm.
Going, said she's going to her sister's or something. And so yeah, then we get an undetermined amount of time at this point has gone by. We don't know how long it's been. Um,
It's got to be a few days because he's got like a big like 5 o'clock shadow thing going on.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
he's
he's in this
clearly not
diner,
shaving.
and the waitress is clearly flirting with him. But he's talking about how he's hoping to get his wife back and blah blah blah. And it's just a little awkward enough for me to mark awkward diner scene. Plus the rest of what happens here is weird.
Yeah.
But he hears a gun. Everybody hears a gunshot outside. So, um, everybody else ducks down, but him being the war hero that he is, runs outside and sees. Oh, he hears the guy yell "Tadpole." He hears Walter yelling, "Come out here, Tadpole," or something like that. And it's Walter, and he's in his full military uniform and has a gun to Buddy's wife.
He's also all clean shaven. He's got a haircut. Looks
Got a
good. Yeah, he
haircut,
looks
yeah,
good.
trimmed his beard. Um, Probably because they would be looking for him with long hair and everything else. But also I think it has to do with what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I did put in my notes that he showed up in uniform for some reason and cut his hair, but that became very clear pretty quickly right after I wrote that note what was going on. But he essentially says he wants Fancy out and free, and he lets Buddy's wife go, and she grabs the baby, and he takes Buddy instead. And he says, "I want Fancy to be set free." And apparently, and Kelsey Grammer's like, "No, you can't do that. She's in a mental institution. I couldn't even get her out if I wanted to." And so Buddy is like, "Well," or Walter's like, "Well, I guess this is how it's got to be then." And he pushes Buddy to the side and pulls out another gun and walks towards the cops, not firing a single shot. And the cops just riddle him with bullets and hit Buddy for some reason, even though he's like 6 or 8 feet away.
Yes,
Um,
I noticed that too. That
hits him
felt
in the
unnecessary.
shoulder, just
Yeah.
clipped him in the shoulder, which didn't pay any purpose anywhere in the movie, really, except that I guess it gets him waking up from his shoulder gunshot coma later when his wife is
With
there.
his wife and kids,
Yeah.
because everything's okay now.
But basically, it was suicide by cop. And he makes
Yeah.
this big speech before he does this about this was his, his battalion number and all this stuff, and that he's United States Marines. And this is what happened. And, we don't get health care, and the government gave up on us after the war, and, which is a valid point. That was a real thing that
Yeah.
happened, and still happens, sadly. But and after all that speech, he pulls out the other gun and they shoot him dead right there. Um, so we find out that what was happening in this basement, it's much darker than it needed to be. But they
Yeah.
were basically forcing the teenagers to impregnate each other. So it was basically forcing the men to rape the women, I assume, and like I don't want to think about it too much, but it was very dark. Basically, they were forcing. I'm assuming they were using the drugs to make things more agreeable, and it was like just a really bad situation, really dark situation. But I assume that's how he got the fabric, is that he ripped it off of somebody or something. I don't know. It again, very dark.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is just kind of glossed over at the end of the movie. There's no weight given to it at all, other than the viewer going, "Holy shit, that's way darker than what I thought it was going to be."
Well, and then we see the two little girls from the beginning of the movie, which is then I'm like, oh, so the whole thing took place in 1988. It wasn't
Yeah,
out of order, which so that like
I
changed.
didn't ever think it was out of order, really.
I thought the beginning scene was at a different time because the time card came later.
Right. I know. It didn't really that didn't really be that wasn't a thing for me. But yeah, we never find out anything about oh well, so his wife and daughter are there and they're like, we're gonna work through this. And then that's basically how the movie ends. We never get any explanation for the dolls. We never
Nope.
get any explanation why this wife well, I guess the explanation is that she never could have kids of her own. So she was forcing these kids to carry babies.
So rather than adopt somebody,
Right.
right, let's
Because
just
they
do a
clearly
bunch
have
of
money.
crime.
They
A lot of
clearly have
money.
money. So that isn't really an issue.
No.
Hell, they could probably have gotten kids off like the black market for, cheaper than that, and it would have been less dark than what happened in the movie. But yeah, that's essentially the end of the movie. It's unclear what was planned, what wasn't, what happens to Fancy at the end of the movie besides her being locked up, what the dolls symbolized.
I
You
don't
know,
understand Walter and Fancy's relationship at all. Like they hate each other, but they're working together.
well,
But
I just assumed that was all an act.
I mean, maybe it was
But then to what end?
right.
Right, like what were they planning on doing? I guess the whole plan was maybe to pin all of this on Buddy, but then that didn't really go that, or maybe there was just to pin
The
the
one
guy
murder,
that yeah on Buddy. But
maybe.
that's really elaborate to pin a murder on somebody. That was a lot of stuff that had to go right for pinning a murder. There's a lot easier ways to do it, I imagine, especially in 1988 with no real forensics or anything like that.
Well, and they established though early on that like Fancy and Walter are not getting along well, right? When she does kind of the whole like seductive dance thing and he's passed out drunk. Like there's a whole conversation about how he doesn't put in the effort and he doesn't care and he talks about how he loves
True.
her, but what makes this day different than any other, right? So like they're already like having so we know they're having some problems.
Right, and that isn't really around Buddy, so
Right. That's before Buddy.
that wasn't part of the performance. So yeah, I mean everything's very unclear.
Very unclear.
But
But
yeah, that's pretty much the movie. We could keep going back and forth
yeah.
on these points for a long time, but I don't think we need to dig too deep into it. That's the confusing end to a confusing movie.
All right, so we got to rate the thing, right? So we've got our Keijo meter scale of 1 to 20 or 0 to 20 really. 0 low, 20 high. We do overall quality and overall caginess. You know, I would say that like the performances were good. I think the actors were good. I think the story is very convoluted and doesn't answer all of its questions and the script is dodgy at times or even non-existent based on some things. Um, so I don't want to be like overly harsh
Well,
to the movie.
should we do a couple reviews before we rate
Oh
it?
yeah, I'm
The thing.
sorry.
It's
Yeah.
okay. So would you like to hear 1 out of 10s or 10 out of 10s first?
Let's start with the ones and then we'll end on the high note.
Okay. This one is just titled Really. Um, for from Louisiana Lawn Care. I'm from Louisiana and they do not speak like Hicks in Grand Isle. Also looks nothing like the place. Cage is supposed to be a Marine, but he is wearing a goddamn army uniform. At least you guys could have got that right. What a crap. This one is from Purple Tangerine Promotions. This is just utter crap. Completely embarrassing for all involved. I love Nick Cage and keep putting myself through these awful movies. Maybe it's time to stop now. Only scenes I enjoyed were with my other favorite actor, Kelsey Grammer. Story is beyond flawed and have been done much better before.
Fair.
Yeah, that's all fair. This one just says horrible. Shame of Nicolas Cage. This is a terrible movie with a lot of moving mistakes. This one says, "What happened to Nick Cage's career? This film is awful. Everything that Cage has done over the last 10 years has clearly just been for money. Does he ever turn down a script? With regards to this film, I just didn't buy into any of the characters. The acting isn't terrible, but isn't great either. Save your time and choose the other film you were considering watching." How do they know I was considering watching another film? That's crazy.
I will say, just real quick, I don't really care for the criticism of he just did it for the money. It's his job. That's what he's supposed to be doing, right? Like most people do their job because of the money.
Yeah.
Let's just be
Well,
honest about that for
also,
a minute.
he has said he likes the work.
Yeah.
And
He
so
enjoys the
by
process.
2019, his debts were pretty much paid. I mean, he did
Yeah.
not need to do this movie. He
No.
just likes interesting characters and he likes to try different things. He's said that in interviews before. It's been shown in the movies he chooses. Um,
Fair.
I like this review. Why was this movie ever made? He was much better in Moonstruck and Raising Arizona. This film is just a complete waste of time and complete garbage. I can't believe it was ever made. Does he really need the money that bad? Again, going into the money thing. But it's funny to compare this movie to Moonstruck or Raising Arizona. Like you've only seen three Nick Cage films: Moonstruck, Raising Arizona, and then you're like, I'm gonna watch Grand Isle based on those movies, even though it has nothing in common with any of those movies.
Oh man.
But yeah, I mean, I would agree. Moonstruck, and we haven't watched on the podcast yet, but I've seen Racing Arizona. Delightful movie. I can't wait to watch it with you, Derek. That's another one that I can't wait for you to see. But yeah, um,
But better than this.
better than this, significantly better than this. I know it's hard to believe. But yeah, those are the 1 out of 10s. Let's look at some 10 out of 10s because these are the really crazy ones. Um, I don't really know this what he's talking about. This one, all the Barry Normans with their slow burn buzzword are hilarious. This is a creepy movie. It's got Nicolas Cage and is an edge of your seat film that's gonna have you thinking. Well worth a watch.
Okay.
It's also worth noting that IMDb only has 3 10 out of 10 reviews for this movie.
That's fair.
That's one of them. This one, the second one is such a great film with a cool twist I did not see coming. A must watch. And then the third and final 10 out of 10 review. Nicolas Cage and KaDee Strickland are both exceptional in this movie. You think the movie is going one way, and then it isn't. Keeps you in parts on the edge of your chair. Okay.
Well,
So
there
yeah,
you go.
those that's what the general public thinks. Very split, although way more 1 out of 10 reviews than 10 out of 10. So that's not super split, I guess.
No. No, a 4.7 on IMDb is certainly not split. And look, I'm looking at our scores, and over time, I start to maybe regret some of my earlier scores, thinking maybe I was too harsh on a particular movie or too lenient on another. But I think I'm gonna have to give this, thinking it over, I think I have to give it like an 8
Which is funny because you said 4.7 out of 10 was too low.
on IMDb. IMDb is a different scale than us. They tend to be higher. Like you see a lot of stuff in the sixes, a lot of 6.2, 6.3s, 5.9s, like stuff like that. 4.7 felt low for IMDb.
Well, 4.7 to translate into our scale would be close to a 10, basically.
I know, but it's a different scale.
Okay. So
It's
you're
also, keep in mind,
saying
this is just the two of us versus, potentially thousands.
right. And so you're giving it an 8?
I think so.
I was gonna say a 9, so I guess we're pretty close
Okay.
on that. We're both a little lower than IMDb.
Yeah.
So then we got to rate the caginess.
Yeah.
And this did have some pretty cagey moments.
It did. It had some.
Not a ton. But when it went that route, it was pretty cagey. So I was thinking like a 7.
That's fair. Yeah.
Where are you at
Um,
with it?
I was kind of mulling around an 8, but now it just said 7, and I'm looking at some of the other movies. I think I think a 7 is fair. I like 7. Let's go with
Okay, so we're
7.
both at a 7 on
Yeah.
caginess.
So an
And
eight and a
then an
half on
8.5.
quality. Yeah, and a 7 on caginess. So there you go. I think that's totally fair, frankly, for that movie. And now we got to figure out which Nicolas Cage movie is going to join the Wheel O Cage and replace Grand Isle. And that is the movie Primal. So Primal joins the Wheel O Cage. So to find out which Nicolas Cage movie we're talking about next time on the show, go to comingofcage.com and watch our Wheel O Cage spins to find out. Ryan, anything else on Grand Isle? All right. Well, that'll do it for us. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening, watching. You can find us at comingofcage.com. Subscribe to us at the Derrico Studios YouTube channel if you want to see us, or on your podcast app of choice if the voice is good enough for you.
See y'all next time.